Shortly before the dawn of Saturday morning, John Fitzgerald Kennedy comes home to the White House. He had been the nation's 35th president for a period of 2 years and 10 months.
I'm Oliver Stone, and this is Dealey Plaza, the place where John Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963. Back in 1991, I made a film called JFK. That movie tried to explore the mysteries that enshrouded this place and that day. We also tried to explore the reasons why President Kennedy was killed. At the end of our film, we alerted the public that almost 30 years after Kennedy's assassination, tens of thousands of documents were still being kept secret about his murder and his policies. JFK created a year-long sensation in the media. Some quarters praised the film, others attacked it. But at the end of that unprecedented controversy, a new agency of government was formed. It was called the Assassination Records Review Board. The board went to work declassifying this immense amount of material. Yet the public has not been made aware of what, in fact, constitutes a new factual record of who Kennedy was and the real circumstances of his murder. In this series, you will be informed for the first time what was in many of the most important of these files. We have to do this. We have to keep doing this because democracy and our freedom from fear dies when there is no longer trust between the people and their government.
In the annals of America has been written to the crack of an assassin's bullet. A nation mourns, the world grieves. The man who became 35th president less than 3 years ago is dead. His rendezvous with grim destiny begins a little after noontime as his plane lands in Dallas. At 1:25, the motorcade moves into the downtown area. Death is 6 minutes away. In a warehouse, a sniper with a rifle poised waits. The cheers of the crowd almost muffle the 3 shots. The assassin's aim is deadly. The area is aswarm with police, rangers, and Secret Service men. The murderer slips the net, but a few blocks away, a man is captured after he is reported to have killed a policeman. That man is a 24-year-old pro-Castro Texan who once sought Soviet citizenship. He is charged with murder. Meanwhile, the president had been rushed to a nearby hospital where life lingered as a waiting world prayed. A half hour later, he was dead, his life crushed like his wife's abandoned bouquet.
After his brother's murder, without hesitation, Attorney General Robert Kennedy began investigating a domestic conspiracy.
My father's first phone call was to the CIA desk officer at Langley, and he asked them, "Did your people conduct this horror?"
We know from how Bobby operated that terrible day, November 22nd, 1963, at his home in McLean, Virginia, that he immediately suspected there was not a lone gunman. Why do we know this? Because he was being told by his closest aides, people like Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers, who were in the limousine immediately behind President Kennedy's limousine. They were both World War II veterans. They knew what gunfire sounded like. They reported it to him that gunfire had not just come from the rear, it had come from different sides. There was gunfire from the front as well. It was a crossfire.
I was in the East Room with my dad and with Jackie and a couple of my siblings, and Lyndon Johnson came in and told the adults in the room that Lee Harvey Oswald had been killed and that a man had shot him. And I said to my dad and mom at that time, why did he shoot him? Did he love our family? And nobody really answered the question. So I didn't know whether we were supposed to be happy that he got shot. And the way that they acted was that this only compounded the tragedy, that it was not a good thing. But I didn't really understand it. I did immediately have that question. Why would this man shoot in public in a place where he knew he was going to get caught? Why would he make that sacrifice of his own life to kill Lee Harvey Oswald? Did he love our family? And, you know, within a couple of years, right, it was very clear to everybody he did not love our family. He was a mobster.
When Bobby looked at the phone logs of who Jack Ruby was talking to on the phone before he went into the Dallas basement of the police station, he said it read like the witness list of the Senate Rackets Committee. In other words, all mob guys.
My father at that time was not aware of the level of involvement between the CIA and the Mafia, that they essentially were a seamless organization.
In 1961, the FBI had discovered secret CIA Mafia plots to assassinate Castro. And when Attorney General Robert Kennedy was told about them, he requested a full briefing from the CIA. They admitted to the plots, but they claimed they had stopped when in fact they were still ongoing, run by CIA officer William Harvey and Chicago mobster Johnny Roselli.
And who was the third party that he suspected in the assassination of his brother? The CIA, the Mafia, anti-Castro exiles. In fact, he calls up somebody who's involved with the Cuban Exile Committee and says bluntly, one of your guys did it. That's Harry Ruiz Williams. He doesn't accuse him of doing it, but he says one of your guys did it.
Did Robert Kennedy ever stop inquiring into his brother's assassination?
The day that his brother died, he lost virtually all the investigative capacity at the Justice Department. He had 30,000 employees at the Justice Department. Half of them were FBI employees who ostensibly worked for him. Traditionally, however, and in reality, they worked for J. Edgar Hoover. He couldn't investigate it. And so his posture, first of all, he was shattered. So for the first year, he didn't want it. Nothing could bring Jack back. He didn't want to hear about it. He told Nick Katzenbach, I'm not going to testify before the Warren Commission. I'm not going to have anything to do with it. And he tried as little as possible to comment on it. When he did comment on it privately, he would say they did a shoddy job. Publicly, he would never say anything. But he knew what it was. It was a commission, and commissions in this country have a tradition of essentially anointing orthodoxies.
He knew whatever investigation was under the control of the White House, of Lyndon Johnson's White House, and the FBI was going to be a bogus investigation. I have talked to many of Bobby Kennedy's close aides, Dick Goodwin, Frank Mankiewicz, Adam Walensky. All of them have told me that Bobby Kennedy did not believe the Warren Commission, believed that it was a fairy tale, a convenient cover-up, and Bobby Kennedy was determined to get the truth and to bring a new official inquiry to look into his brother's murder as soon as he was back in the White House.
To the White House in Washington comes the final verdict on the fateful tragedy which engulfed the nation 10 months ago. U.S. Chief Justice Earl Warren is the bearer of the sad epilogue. The report on the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy compiled by the commission created by President Johnson, which was headed by the Chief Justice himself.
The Warren Commission was not Lyndon Johnson's idea. Johnson had been in favor of a Texas state investigation into Kennedy's murder. The concept of an independent panel was strongly suggested to the White House first by Eugene Rostow, dean of the Yale Law School and brother of Walter Rostow. On Sunday, November 24th, Rostow told Johnson's assistant, Bill Moyers, that they had to appoint a blue ribbon panel because America and world opinion had been so shaken by the murder of Oswald and the performance of the Dallas police that the public was not believing anything. The Washington Post was also in favor of the idea. Publisher Kay Graham and editor Al Friendly were going to run an editorial endorsing the concept on November 25th, the day of JFK's funeral. And powerful columnist Joseph Alsop used all his techniques of persuasion.
And have Moyers call Friendly or Kay, I'm sure that you will have the strongest possible support. It'll be thought that everything has been done that needs doing.
Johnson began moving forward, appointing an extraordinary federal panel.
In regard to the Warren Commission, who do you think was the most puzzling appointment to this commission?
Allen Dulles' appointment to the Warren Commission, I think, is one of the great frauds of American history.
Have you ever committed any act of violence in your life? No.
Lyndon Johnson went around telling people that Bobby Kennedy, of all people, lobbied to have Dulles put on the commission.
I don't think that even if you had 10 more commissions, you'd ever get away from the idea that maybe there was a plot. We just didn't find any traces of it.
What really happened with Allen Dulles was the CIA lobbied to have him put on the commission because they needed to have one of their own on the commission to make sure that certain doors remain closed. He also names Jerry Ford, the young congressman from Michigan, to the commission. Ford is very close to J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI.
Not everyone was as eager to serve on the commission as Dulles was. Johnson conjured up images of atomic annihilation to intimidate Earl Warren into chairing the commission. Johnson did the same with Senator Richard Russell.
We got to take this out of the arena where they're testifying that Khrushchev and Castro did this and did that, and kicking us into a war that can kill 40 million Americans in an hour.
Even before Oswald was killed, Cliff Carter of Johnson's White House had called the Dallas police and told them not to indict Oswald as part of a communist conspiracy. Why? For fear of a confrontation with the USSR. Johnson's nuclear warning was based upon CIA reports that Oswald had been to Mexico 7 weeks before the assassination and visited the Cuban and Soviet consulates. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover understood this information was not accurate. Hoover also added that the case as it stood was not strong enough to obtain a conviction of Oswald. The FBI would do approximately 80% of the investigation for the Warren Commission, and Hoover would keep his doubts about the Oswald case concealed. With that and much more kept secret, stories were leaked to the press that alleged assassin Lee Harvey Oswald would be found guilty by the commission. The commission worked in almost complete secrecy. There were only a handful of investigatory articles published about the JFK case while they were in session. Yet even though almost no one knew what the commission was doing, on the day the 888-page Warren report was released, the press accepted it without reservations. In fact, the night it was issued to the public, both NBC and CBS aired specials propagating its conclusions, but not asking questions about how these conclusions were arrived at.
In 300,000 words of lean and orderly language, the Warren Commission makes these major findings. Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated President Kennedy.
Lee Harvey Oswald was himself killed by Jack Ruby in full view of millions of Americans.
It was later revealed that NBC approached the FBI and told them they would reveal nothing in their reporting on the Kennedy case that would contradict their findings. It was also discovered that some members of the press cooperated in supporting the commission's findings in return for access to witnesses. In 1978, producer Bernie Birnbaum of CBS admitted that sources on the commission leaked its contents and his program was in production for months in advance.
The New York Times got its version out of the Warren Report within 48 hours. And in an introductory essay, you have Anthony Lewis saying, right there with the release of the Warren Report, he said the Warren Commission released all the documents and all the evidence it had acquired, except for the names of a few sensitive people, and withheld nothing else. All the documents were released. The irony of this is the Warren Commission documents were not released for 2 or 3 months later. They finally came out in November. So here you have the New York Times assuring the public that all the documents have been released and that no question remains unresolved, in the absence of having seen any of the 26 volumes of supplementary evidence.
If you read the Warren Report, you get a very convincing picture that Oswald did it, and he did it alone. And that report, as you know, was sent worldwide with a lot of publicity. What wasn't sent worldwide with a lot of publicity was the 26 volumes of evidence. And that is where you begin to see that the evidence they use in the Warren Report does not always match up with the evidence that was given to them during the Commission's investigation.
The Commission published those volumes at Allen Dulles' suggestion.
Here is the Commission's report. I keep it, G, at my right hand here. And here are the various volumes, 26 of them.
In a private conference, Dulles said, "No one reads anymore. There'll be a few professors who will read the record, but the public will read very little." But still, the Commission classified tens of thousands of pages of documents. These included FBI reports, Secret Service reports, and hundreds of their own internal memoranda. In 1967, the Warren Report was under attack from several books and magazine articles. Walter Cronkite interviewed Warren Commissioner John McCloy during a 4-night special co-hosted by Dan Rather.
Are you satisfied that as much effort was put into challenging that case as into establishing it? In other words, did the accused man get a fair trial?
I'll answer that in just a moment. If I may just say one thing, which I'd like to say. In the first place, I had some questions as to the propriety of my appearing here as a former member of the Commission to comment on the evidence of the Commission. It seems to be some question, and I think there is some question about the advisability of doing that.
McCloy never answered Cronkite's question. But even worse, CBS employee Roger Feynman later discovered internal documents showing the network had violated its own journalistic code of ethics. McCoy consulted extensively on the series through his daughter Ellen, an administrative assistant to CBS President Richard Salant. In 1992, reporter Jerry Polikoff confronted Salant and Ellen McCoy with the documents revealing John McCloy's instructions for the content of the show. Only then did CBS admit to their concealment. CBS, NBC, and the New York Times continued to support the Commission's finding for decades afterwards and never publicly reviewed the 26 volumes of supplemental evidence.
By the time the Assassination Records Review Board came along in the mid-1990s, there were still 3,000 Warren Commission documents withheld.
The revolution is over. Order has returned to Havana, but enthusiasm and fervor still fill the air following the final assumption to power of the revolutionary regime, now the legally recognized provisional government. Havana's ovation for Fidel Castro himself had been long deferred. These scenes show his triumphal march across the island to the capital following the victory. In every town and hamlet, a cheering welcome greeted the rebel leader.
In 1959, Fidel Castro had come to power by overthrowing the corrupt and brutal despot Fulgencio Batista. During Batista's 25-year hold on power, he was closely allied with American big business and organized crime, allowing him to accumulate a personal fortune reportedly worth $300 million. When he fled the country it took 3 cargo planes to transport his holdings to Portugal. In June of 1959, Castro's systematic land reform, which limited the size of property holdings, went into effect in Cuba. The law caused many American businessmen to petition the White House for action to be taken. And so in 1960, under Eisenhower, the CIA created the Cuban Project in their effort to oust Castro. Kennedy, who had campaigned as a strong anti-communist, signed off on the Bay of Pigs invasion plan in April of 1961. Kennedy's approval of the plan contained 2 distinct limitations. America would supply arms and equipment, but there would be no Americans in the landing force. Second, after preliminary airstrikes by Cuban exile pilots, there would only be further strikes after the invasion secured an airfield. Dulles believed that Kennedy would, like Eisenhower, support the operation with direct U.S. military intervention if needed, all the while assuring him it would not be necessary.
Well, first I want to say that there will not be, under any conditions, be an intervention in Cuba by United States Armed Forces.
The invasion was a disaster and became the first stain on his administration.
Victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan. Further statements, detailed discussions are not to conceal responsibility, because I'm the responsible officer of the government.
In public, Kennedy accepted the blame. In private, he and his brother suspected they had been lied to by the CIA.
Allen Dulles confessed that the mission was bound to fail, as it was planned by the CIA without U.S. military support. He confessed this while preparing an article for Harper's Magazine with the young editor, Willie Morris, that he couldn't have done this with his small group of exiles, his Cuban brigade. He needed the Marines and the Air Force to go in. And he thought Kennedy was going to be young and pliable, and that at the 11th hour, Kennedy would be forced to send in the full might of the U.S. military.
While drafting the article in 1965, Dulles told his editor that Kennedy, he thought he was a god.
Jack Kennedy did stand firm. He did not send in the military. He did not make it an even bigger global crisis than it already was. Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs debacle, is just furious. He knows he's been lied to, deceived by his senior military and intelligence advisors. He announces that the agency is going to be downsized. And he vows, famously, he tells friends he's going to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And actually he does move to decapitate the top of the CIA. He lets it be known that Allen Dulles, as well as his 2 top advisors, Richard Bissell, who is also very involved with the Bay of Pigs, and General Cabell, who was the right-hand man to Allen Dulles. So the top 3 people in the CIA are immediately know their days are numbered, and he forces them out before the end of the year. It wasn't just the Bay of Pigs that angered President Kennedy when it came to the CIA. In that same month, in April of 1961, he was also being lied to about a coup in France, a military coup that was aimed at overthrowing President Charles de Gaulle, one of our strongest allies.
Allen Dulles, who had a long history of antagonism with de Gaulle, falsely reported to Kennedy that the vast majority of the French military was staunchly opposed to de Gaulle's support of Algerian self-determination. What he didn't tell him was that as far back as 1959, the CIA had discussed his overthrow. This coup attempt, orchestrated by 4 French generals, was quickly put down, and several news reports pointed to Allen Dulles' hand in supporting the episode.
JFK assures the French ambassador, I have nothing to do with this. I stand in full support of President de Gaulle, but he says something very, very alarming. He tells the French ambassador, President Kennedy, that I'm not in full control, though, of my entire government. I'm not in control of the CIA, and I can't speak for what's happening there. That's a stunning admission for a U.S. president to make.
Beyond a coup, in fact, there were at least 6 attempts to assassinate de Gaulle by the OAS, and others that continued even after he agreed to grant Algeria its independence. In one of these plots, there is evidence that French dissidents and the CIA conspired to poison de Gaulle.
Allen Dulles was the only commissioner who did not have a regular job. Therefore, he became the single most active member of the commission. He asked the most questions, a remarkable 31% of the total, and he attended the most hearings, even more than Chairman Earl Warren. Yet in spite of this, he never revealed to the commission the CIA plots to kill Castro or why Kennedy had fired him over the Bay of Pigs. Behind the scenes, he tipped off the CIA about certain questions the commission would ask regarding Oswald, and he rehearsed with them the precise wording of their denials of any contact with the alleged assassin. Contrary to media reports, the Warren Commission was not unanimous in its beliefs. Senator Richard Russell of Georgia did not want to serve on the commission. After he attended the first meeting, he quickly became disenchanted with the proceedings, particularly the roles of J. Edgar Hoover and Acting Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach. His personal papers at the University of Georgia Library contain a memo written after the initial December 5, 1963 executive session. Something strange is happening. Warren and Katzenbach know all about the FBI and are apparently planning to show Oswald as the only one considered. This, to me, is an untenable position. His papers revealed that he wrote a dissenting opinion for the presentation at the final commission meeting of September 18th. On that day, he shared his concerns with President Johnson.
Well, we've got you a pretty good report.
Well, what difference did it make which bullet got Connolly?
Well, it don't make much difference, but the commission believes that the same bullet that hit Kennedy hit Connolly. Well, I don't believe it.
I don't either.
He also thought that Oswald did not act alone. Russell was strongly influenced by the Zapruder film and by the testimony of John Connolly, who himself did not believe the first shot that hit Kennedy also went through him.
I did not hear the second shot, the one that hit me. I understand there's some question in the minds of the experts about whether or not we could both have been hit with the same bullet, and that was the first bullet. I just don't happen to believe that. I don't believe it, and I will believe it.
This forced the other commissioners to include Connolly's dissent in the report, and as a result, they could not absolutely deny the possibility of a conspiracy.
Is there a transcript of that final meeting of the Warren Commission?
At that meeting, he was going to probably voice his opinion and his dissent against the single bullet striking both men and coming out as pristine as it was. Richard Russell probably thought the only female in the room was a stenographer because apparently she was over there doodling or writing or whatever, but there's no official record of that session.
In 1968, Harold Weisberg told Senator Russell that the National Archives had no transcript of the final meeting. Russell was beside himself and had his assistant confirm what had happened. Russell became the first commissioner to criticize the Warren report in public. He was followed by commission members John Sherman Cooper and Hale Boggs.
A record number of Americans, upwards of 67 million, go to the polls to elect the 35th President of the United States.
So now my wife and I prepare for a new administration and for a new baby. Thank you.
The years of dissent are over. and Kennedy must now shape his own policy as president, sometimes in conflict with what his predecessors have done, especially in foreign policy.
To those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word that one form of colonial control shall not have passed away, merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny.
The Congo is the second largest country in Africa. In 1960, it had been granted its independence from Belgian colonial rule and carried out a democratic election. In the disorder of the transition, the Belgians, backed by England and France, sought to eliminate its charismatic prime minister, Patrice Lumumba. Once again, Eisenhower and CIA Director Allen Dulles favored the European nation in this colonial conflict.
And Lumumba, in order to stop that, had invited Russian advisors into the Congo to secure the country. At that point, Eisenhower gave the go-ahead to have him assassinated.
Eisenhower got very impatient with Allen Dulles. He had told him to get rid of Lumumba, and it wasn't happening. And so he got very frustrated in the middle of an NSC meeting and just blurted out, you know, an order to kill, not to anybody in particular, but blurted out to everybody assembled there to kill Lumumba.
Kennedy never knew this. He gets elected the following November of 1960, and he heads in the opposite direction.
But events are already in motion. With the backing of British and U.S. intelligence and arms, Colonel Joseph Mobutu's forces captured President Lumumba at the beginning of December 1960.
Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN Secretary General, calls JFK, who's the president-elect at this point, and asks him to intercede to get Lumumba released from prison. When Kennedy intervenes to save Lumumba, that's a signal directly to the CIA and the Belgian secret police that they have to dispatch this guy immediately. And so 48 hours before Kennedy takes the oath of office, Lumumba is delivered into the hands of his enemies. He's taken out and shot in the head. Kennedy doesn't know this until a month later.
Who finally tells him? The CIA? No. They still keep it a secret. He's informed by his UN ambassador, Adlai Stevenson. His face crumples. He's holding his hand. He's grimacing in anguish, hearing about the assassination of Patrice Lumumba.
Kennedy would say in meetings about the Congo, the one way to keep the U.S. out of the Congo is to keep the UN in the Congo. And Kennedy backed Hammarskjöld in terms of getting a government of national unity in Leopoldville.
Hammarskjöld died in a mysterious plane crash in September of 1961 as he was working on a peace treaty between the breakaway state of Katanga and the Congo.
The reason why Katanga seceded was because it was an extremely rich province in a wide range of very valuable minerals. And the Belgian company, a colonial company called Union Minière, convinced the Belgian government to use Belgian military and paramilitary forces to encourage the province to secede. So the province secedes from the Congo and announces itself as an independent country supported by British and Belgian imperial interests.
Dag Hammarskjöld is dead, but the United Nations lives. His tragedy is deep in our hearts, but the tasks for which he died are at the top of our agenda.
The U.S. ambassador and close friend of President Kennedy, Edmund Gullion, sent a cable home saying, contrary to the official explanation for this, tragic incident, this was an assassination.
The photographs of Hammarskjöld show his body as the only one not burned or charred, and he had a playing card, reportedly the ace of spades, stuffed into his shirt collar above the knot of the tie. Now, due to Susan Williams' book and the new evidence offered by Desmond Tutu and the Union of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there are controversial documents that indicate Allen Dulles was involved in the sabotage of the plane. The project was called Operation Celeste, and was to be carried out through a secret white supremacist group called Samir.
Kennedy understood pretty early in his administration that the Central Intelligence Agency had an agenda that was completely their own.
Kennedy now conveyed to Prime Minister Macmillan of England that he would not be backing European imperialism in the Congo, and he allowed UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson to vote for a use of force resolution to expel all foreign mercenaries from the Breakaway region. At the end of 1962, Katanga's forces fired on a UN helicopter and outpost. Kennedy approved a UN military attack, codenamed Operation Grand Slam. 1 month after combat operations, Katanga was defeated, and the Congo was one country again.
Kennedy came back to the United Nations a year after that to reiterate the fact that the peacekeeping operation is working, we have a democratic government, and we still do not accept Belgium's role in the secession of this province called Katanga.
Today the clouds have lifted a little, so that new rays of hope can break through. The pressures on West Berlin appear to be temporarily eased. Political unity in the Congo has been largely restored. A neutral coalition in Laos, while still in difficulty, is at least in being. The integrity of the United Nations Secretariat has been reaffirmed.
Today we are here to review the major findings of our full investigation of FBI domestic intelligence.
After the Watergate scandal in 1975, Senator Frank Church conducted the first full-scale investigation of the abuses and crimes of the CIA and FBI. Many secrets were revealed for the first time to the public. For example, the FBI's programs to destabilize the Black Panthers and to harass and intimidate Martin Luther King into perhaps taking his own life. The public was also made aware of the CIA plots to kill foreign leaders like Patrice Lumumba and Fidel Castro. Former Warren Commissioner Gerald Ford was president at this time. Prior to the formation of the Church Committee, Ford had appointed his own commission, headed by Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, to investigate domestic CIA activities. On January 16, 1975, at a luncheon with executives and editors of the New York Times, President Ford, in explaining why he appointed such a conservative panel to investigate these CIA crimes, said that they needed to guard the national interest. Editor A.M. Rosenthal asked, "From what?" Ford blurted out, "From things like assassinations."
Don't you think that's an exceedingly loose way to run an agency, particularly the CIA?
Well, we're going to try to run it tighter.
When CIA Director William Colby turned out to be honest and open with the Rockefeller and Church committees, he was replaced by George H.W. Bush, who during his confirmation hearing hid his relationship with the CIA. As part of the Church Committee, Senators Richard Schweiker and Gary Hart set up a subcommittee to investigate the Kennedy assassination and how the Warren Commission had been served by the FBI and the CIA. That report severely criticized the Warren Commission's lack of independence and their over-reliance on government investigators for their findings.
After a lot of prodding and pressuring from the Warren Commission counsel, J. Edgar Hoover writes Mr. Rankin and said, yes, we did have relationship with Mr. Ruby, and between March 11th, 59, October 2nd, 59, some 8, 9 occasions, he acted as our informant or something to that effect. Now, who said that? Who said that at the time of the Warren Commission report? Did anybody ever imply that Jack Ruby was a confidential informer for the FBI? Nobody breathed that. That was classified.
The Church Committee had access to the internal CIA report on their plots with the Mafia to kill Castro, which began in 1960 under Director Allen Dulles. In that report, the agency admitted they had no presidential authorization for the assassination attempts. Yet, during his nearly 10-month service on the Warren Commission, Dulles never told his colleagues about this mafia connection. Senator Schweiker was infuriated by both the alliance and the attempted assassination of a foreign leader.
I think the Warren Commission has, in fact, collapsed like a house of cards, and I believe that the Warren Commission was set up at the time to feed pablum to the American people for reasons not yet known, and that one of the biggest cover-ups in the history of our country occurred at that time.
While working as a technician at a film facility, Robert Groden had come into possession of a copy of the famous 8mm Zapruder film. In 6 years, he had shown it in public only 3 times. In 1975, television host Geraldo Rivera heard about this and scheduled Groden and comedian social activist Dick Gregory on his ABC program, Good Night America.
It's the film shot by the Dallas dress manufacturer, Abraham Zapruder, and it's the execution of President Kennedy. Now, before he goes behind the sign, the president is waving to the crowd. When he comes out from behind the sign, he is shot, then Governor Connolly is shot. He's already been hit. He's already been hit. And now? At the bottom of the screen, the headshot. That's the shot that blew off his head. Now, the Warren Commission said that all of the shots were fired from behind by Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone assassin, firing at the president. And as you could see, clearly, the head is thrown violently backwards, completely consistent with the shot from the front, right. That's the most upsetting thing I've ever seen. We'll talk about it in a minute.
Due to public outrage, that national viewing caused the creation of the second major inquiry into President Kennedy's murder. This was called the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
When one considers all the things that happened and did not happen, the missing pieces of evidence and documents that were destroyed and so on, I have no idea what might have happened in Dallas that day.
What's the situation with the HSCA files in 1979?
After the House Select Committee on Assassinations closed up shop, they sealed many of the witness reports. These were not available to the public.
Close to 500,000 records, which were segregated. They were to be sealed under House rules at the time until 2029. Some of them had leaked out. Some were a part of the report on the House Select Committee on Assassinations, but most were not released.
If it takes me 30 years to nail every one of the assassins, then I will continue this investigation for 30 years. I owe that not only to Jack Kennedy, but to the country. Hey, there's Clay!
But then, in 1991, due to the uproar over the film JFK, hearings were held on Capitol Hill.
Most Americans did not believe or support the verdict of the Warren Commission initially, and now more than 3 in 4, according to all recent samplings of public opinion, think some conspiracy was involved.
At the end of that film, the public was made aware that the House Select Committee had classified the vast majority of their materials until 2029.
Of course, we could not go further than we could because many of these files, as you know, were sealed to the American public in the 1960s and were never opened, and the Warren Commission information was always compromised by the fact that the CIA, the FBI, military intelligence never gave any significant information to the Warren Commission members. And in fact, the Warren Commission was one of the members of the Warren Commission was Allen Dulles, who had been fired by President Kennedy as the chief of the CIA. There seems to be the element of the fox investigating the chicken coop here.
Because of the massive media controversy that accompanied the film, Congress was forced to do something about the secrecy still existing 30 years after Kennedy's death.
Clerk will report the title.
Senate 3006, an act to provide for the expeditious disclosure of records relevant to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
I will not permit petty posturing to deflect us from the higher goal of securing public access and official accountability.
Judge Thunheim, what was the concept behind the JFK Records Act?
President John F. Kennedy Records Collection Act of 1992 was what it was called, was created largely to clear up all the questions that people had about the assassination of President Kennedy. There was a frustration that the agencies themselves were never going to release the information, and people wanted to know. And I think people had the right to know, and that's what underlied the entire act.
What were some of your difficulties working with the CIA?
One of the censors at the CIA was at a meeting with us, and there was a document that we put up on the screen and said we were prepared to release it. And I asked him, tell us why we shouldn't release this record. And it was silence for about 2 minutes, and he finally said, I know there's a reason, I just can't think of what it is.
Over 5 million pages of collected records and artifacts are housed at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, and most may be viewed in person.
The review board had an unbelievable task to get at the bottom of the assassination, not as a reinvestigation, but to make the record of the assassination as robust as possible. And that included really pressing federal agencies on records that they may not have thought about as assassination records, but also state and local government. Obviously, Dallas was important, New Orleans was important.
What about the Oswald KGB file?
The National Security Council in September 1998 refused to allow the issue to be raised in the Clinton-Yeltsin meeting. We went to Moscow to try to negotiate release. We got some records, not very much. We got no help from the Department of State. In fact, we weren't even allowed to go into the United States Embassy in Moscow. They claimed later it was just a mix-up, but we could have used some diplomatic help.
How much media coverage did the ARRB get?
We issued 100 or more press releases. We didn't get really too much attention. We were followed most closely probably by the New York Times because they had writers that focused on intelligence and intelligence issues.
I wish there had been more attention. It seemed like the American public today, even 20 years after the review board was in business, is still as interested as they were then and the day of the assassination.
It very definitely should have been an open-ended process. I think there was some thought, probably among the agencies, that they could just wait us out. If they didn't respond and delayed, eventually we wouldn't be in office as a review board anymore, and they wouldn't have to turn over records.
How did you obtain the Zapruder film for the National Archive?
It's the most important piece of evidence of one of the most shocking crimes of American history.
May I have your name, please, sir?
My name is Abraham Zapruder.
We tried to get the family to donate the film to the United States, the original. They could keep the copyright, they can sell the rights to use it, they can do whatever they want with it, but we wanted the original. And the arbitrators, in a 2-to-1 vote, voted to award what was really, I think, an excessive sum. It was around $16 million.
A hard one to swallow as far as the amount, but I think that there would have been criticism if that film was not part of the official JFK collection.
The Zapruder family, after getting all this money, after this windfall profit, they decided to donate the copyright to the 6th Floor Museum. So if you want to publish a book or do a documentary about the Zapruder film, you have to get the permission of the 6th Floor Museum.
The 6th Floor Museum, to this day, insists that Oswald shot Kennedy from that 6th floor window, and virtually everything in the museum is dedicated to that proposition. The Zapruder film shows Kennedy being knocked violently backwards as he was hit in the skull. His body goes back and to the left. Yet this shocking moment is not discussed in the Warren Report. One of the most serious problems the Warren Commission had was in placing Oswald on the 6th floor at the time of the shooting. They said he was there at 12:30 firing shots. They then had him stow the rifle between boxes and run down the single set of stairs in order to flee the crime scene. The problem was there were other employees in the vicinity of his alleged escape path, and the testimony of 3 of them conflicted with what was in the Warren Report. Barry Ernest went looking for one of these employees.
My focus was on finding a specific witness to the assassination, which was Victoria Adams. This would have gone on from when I returned from Dallas in late '68 until probably 2000. There was not much written about her, even in her testimony, but one thing she did say was that she graduated from high school in San Francisco. I finally ended up with a school called Presentation High School, and it had her name in it. And I wrote to them, the alumni office, to try and find out if I could get an email address or a telephone number for this woman. I never received a response, but the state police officer who I knew said, let me handle it. And within a week, he had written to Vicki Adams and asked her if she was the woman who once worked in Dallas and had been a witness to the JFK assassination. She had replied to him, yes, that's me. Vicki worked on the 4th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. She testified that immediately after the assassination, she ran down the back stairs in an effort to get outside to see what was going on.
According to the Warren report, Oswald was seen in the 2nd floor lunchroom within 90 seconds of the shooting by Dallas police officer Marion Baker and Oswald's supervisor, Roy Truly, as they went up the stairs to the 6th floor.
I turned around and asked him if the man worked for him and if he knew him. And he said, yes, said he works for me, and I know him.
For Vicki Adams to have reached the 1st floor within 60 seconds and not have seen or heard Oswald or Baker and Truly on the wooden stairs was in conflict with the Warren Commission's assumption that Oswald was on those stairs at the time.
So what the Warren Commission did was successfully deceive the public into thinking that Vicki was just another mistaken or a confused witness. The whole case, based on the Warren Commission, is Vicki was wrong because she went down the stairs later than she thought, and she saw 2 men there who couldn't have been there unless she had come down the stairs later.
Employees William Shelley and Billy Lovelady had been on the front steps of the building, watching the motorcade pass. According to their statements, after the shooting, they then went to the railroad tracks beside the grassy knoll, returning to the book depository within several minutes. The Warren Commission, needing to keep the stairs clear for Oswald's descent, claimed that Vicki had come down after Baker and Truly had passed the 4th floor on their way up, and late enough to see Shelley and Lovelady return from the railroad tracks.
According to her testimony, she left the window on the 4th floor within 15 to 30 seconds of the assassination. The Warren Commission elevated that time to 1 minute. She said she arrived on the 1st floor within 60 seconds of the assassination. The Warren Commission elevated that time to several minutes. When Vicki was giving her Warren Commission testimony, she felt that David Bellin, who was questioning her, did not believe her. And so she asked Bellin if she could be a part of the reenactments that were going on. Bellin refused. When she then said, interview Sandra Stiles, a co-worker who went down the stairs with me, Bellin said, we don't need her, we have you. Sandra Stiles, when I interviewed her, she corroborated everything Vicki had said. She came down the stairs with Vicki. She didn't see or hear anyone on the stairs, and she didn't see Shelley and Lovelady on the 1st floor. In light of that, I went to the National Archives searching for her original testimony. I wanted the original stenographer's tape that was made by the court reporter, the only other person in the room, when David Bellin interviewed Vicki Adams. But when I asked about Vicki's tape, I was told that the tape containing her testimony was missing. And later I learned that that tape had been destroyed by the Warren Commission for no apparent reason.
And Vicki named 3 people who could corroborate her. And the commission had an affidavit from one of them.
The 3 people were Elsie Dorman, who was a co-worker, happened to be filming the motorcade from the 4th floor window, Sandra Stiles, and Dorothy Garner, Vicki's immediate supervisor, and had stood at the window with Vicki. Not a one of them was called as a commission witness. In 1999, I found a document in the National Archives that had been suppressed for 35 years. It was a letter written by Assistant U.S. Attorney Martha Jo Stroud. It was addressed to J. Lee Rankin, the head honcho of the Warren Commission's investigation at that point. It was a transmittal letter forwarding Vicki's signed testimony. In the last paragraph of that letter, the letter quotes Garner as saying that she saw Vicki go down the stairs before she saw Officer Baker and Roy Truly come up. Now, this is in direct contradiction to the Warren Commission's conclusion that Vicki was on the stairs much later than all of this had occurred. When I found and interviewed Dorothy Garner, she confirmed everything. She said that she had been at the window with Vicki, that Vicki had left the window immediately, that she actually followed Vicki outside the office and to a point where she could see her going down the stairs. And it was only after that that Baker and Truly came up the stairs, according to her. And during that whole time, she never saw Oswald. Garner was putting Vicki on the stairs exactly when she said. So the Stroud letter became a very dangerous document.
The Warren Commission concealed the Stroud document. Without the review board's declassification process, we would never have learned of the corroborating testimony of 3 witnesses that provide powerful evidence that Oswald was not on the 6th floor at the time of the shooting.
Tonight, President Trump getting caught up in his own JFK conspiracy after deciding not to release all the documents tied to the assassination.
So all of the records were supposed to have been released in 2017. What happened?
President Trump tweeted that he was excited to release all of the remaining records of the assassination and what they might disclose. And then at the last minute, after meeting with the CIA, he decided to postpone release. It's 1960s era material, and there are redactions that we put in because we felt in the 1990s there was still a reason to keep them from being released. But that's changed. This is 56 years after the assassination. There's no reason to protect this information anymore.
It's certainly against the spirit of the JFK Records Act, and technically now against the law because the mandate was to get everything out by 2017.
You know, they had 25 years to plan for the due date in Washington. It's not just the Trump administration, but they're the ones who tweeted out saying it's all coming. Why the delay?
Well, the White House is citing national security concerns, and we know that at least 18,000 records from the CIA are still being guarded.
The president's decision coming after an appeal from the CIA and the FBI that releasing certain files could put the lives of some of our spies in danger.